Welcome back, everybody. Today's deep dive is all about discipline. A listener sent over this great YouTube video, a motivational speaker from Mindshift Motivation. It's all about how powerful discipline can be.
Yeah, it's really interesting stuff.
So let's dive right in. What did you think was the most impactful message from this video?
I think a lot of people think of discipline as this like rigid, joyless system,
Mm. Yeah, I can definitely see that.
But what I thought was interesting here was how the speaker reframed it.
Mm.
He was saying that actually discipline isn't about restriction at all. It's actually the key to freedom, like real freedom, the freedom to live life the way you want to.
That's a really great point. He even makes this great analogy, right, about how without discipline, we all just become slaves to our impulses.
Yeah.
Distractions, emotions, always wanting that instant gratification.
And we're constantly being pulled in 1,000 different directions. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think what you were saying about that lack of control is that it ultimately pulls us further from our goals.
Right. I mean, think about it. If you're constantly giving in to every distraction, how can you possibly focus on what really matters?
Yeah, it's like trying to build a house during a hurricane.
Exactly.
So that's a great why, I think. But what I thought was really fascinating was what he said about discipline being even more important than things like talent, luck, or even intelligence when it comes to achieving success.
It's true. It's that discipline that allows you to leverage any talent or intelligence you have.
Yeah.
What I think is often overlooked is that structure, that consistency that successful people bring to whatever it is they're working on.
Yeah.
It doesn't really matter what field you're thinking of, like elite athletes or artists or entrepreneurs. They're not just relying on talent.
Yeah.
They're showing up every day, putting in the work, even when they really don't feel like it.
Yeah.
And it's that commitment to the process, that daily grind that really makes a difference.
Absolutely. So, okay, discipline is important. We've established that. But how do we actually get better at it? Is it something we're born with, or can it be learned?
That's a great question. This speaker argues that it's a decision, a conscious choice we make every day.
Okay.
And it's understanding that sometimes, you have to act before the motivation kicks in. You don't wait for inspiration to just strike. You take the first step, and then oftentimes the motivation follows.
So it's almost like choosing discipline over distraction is like a habit in itself, would you say?
Yeah, I like that. Each time we resist that urge to check social media or we don't hit the snooze button, we're basically reinforcing that identity of someone who's in control of their own life.
Absolutely. And it seems like that would be even more important now than ever before. I mean, let's face it, today's world is just nonstop distractions
Or-
24/7.
Yeah, it's like we're handing over our future to these fleeting distractions if we don't actively cultivate discipline.
Yeah, I completely agree. So, where do we even begin? How do we start cultivating this all important discipline?
Well, the speaker recommends starting small, focusing on just one or two non-negotiable habits. And it could be something as simple as like waking up early or doing a quick 10-minute meditation or just committing to spending even 30 minutes working on some sort of personal project.
Okay, so the key is consistency.
Exactly. It's not about being perfect every day.
That makes me think of the compound effect. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's those small, consistent actions accumulating over time.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah. And it's recognizing that, motivation, it comes and goes, but discipline, that's that constant, that internal compass.
Hmm. There are so many times I just really do not feel like working out. But I know that if I just force myself to get started, I always feel better afterwards.
That's it. That's discipline in action. It's making the hard choice because ultimately in the long run, you're going to benefit.
Yeah, it's resisting that temptation to choose the easy path.
It applies to everything in life, work, relationships, creative pursuits.
Okay, so all that sounds great, but what about failure? We all slip up sometimes, right?
Of course,
Yeah.
no one's perfect, right? The speaker says that failure is part of the process.
So, how do we make sure it doesn't become a habit?
It's really all about that reset. You mess up, you get right back on track. You don't dwell on it, learn from it, and move on.
So, it's about progress, not perfection.
Exactly. He ties that to this idea of discipline as self-respect,
Yeah.
valuing yourself and your future enough to make choices today that set you up for success.
I love that. So, it's not punishment, it's about honoring your own potential.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that leads perfectly into how important mindset is. He argues that our beliefs about discipline really shape our entire experience of it. If you believe it's all about restriction and being miserable, you're just going to resist it. But if you see it as a tool for empowerment, you're going to embrace it.
So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Right. You get what you expect.
That's fascinating.
One way to help with that is to even just change the language we use. Like instead of saying, I'll try to be more disciplined, say, I will be disciplined.
Oh, interesting. Seems so simple.
He also compares discipline to those super mundane habits that we do every day without even thinking,
Okay.
like brushing your teeth or getting dressed. We don't question those, right? They're just non-negotiable parts of our day.
So he's saying that we should treat our goals with the same level of commitment.
Exactly. Make those things just as routine. It's not about forcing yourself to do things you hate. It's about creating systems and routines that make discipline effortless.
Okay, so now we've laid this great groundwork for understanding discipline. But how do we actually put it into practice? How do we build those systems and routines? That's what I always struggle with.
Well, that's a great question, and that's exactly what we're going to dig into in the next part of this deep dive. He had some really great ideas about habit stacking, designing your environment for success, and even like rewiring your brain to actually crave discipline.
Oh, that sounds great. I can't wait to hear more about that.
So we've established that discipline is really the key here, right? But I bet you're wondering how to actually like put it into practice, in your everyday life.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it's one thing to understand the idea, but actually doing it consistently, that's the hard part. Any tips on how to build that, like, discipline muscle?
Well, the speaker was saying that, real discipline, lasting discipline, it's not about making these huge changes overnight. It's more about taking small, consistent actions day after day.
So instead of trying to change everything all at once, you're saying it's better to just focus on, like, mastering one or two key habits.
Exactly, yeah. It's like if you were building a house. You wouldn't try to build the whole thing all at once, would you? You start with the foundation and then build up from there.
Right, that makes sense. But how do you choose which habits to start with? Are some better than others?
He doesn't really tell you specific habits to pick, but he suggests you just choose something that's manageable and aligns with your goals. It could be something as simple as waking up at the same time every day or setting aside 10 minutes to read in the morning or even just like committing to completing one important task each day, something that will move you closer to your long-term goals.
Yeah, I find that I get really overwhelmed if I try to focus on too many things at once. I need to just pick one thing. But sometimes even starting small just feels really daunting. Any advice on how to overcome that initial hurdle?
He talked about this technique called habit stacking. You
Mm.
basically just link a new habit you're trying to develop to one you already have.
So, like, you use the existing habit as a trigger for the new one.
Yeah, exactly. So for example, like if you already drink coffee every morning, maybe try adding a 10-minute meditation session right after you finish your coffee.
That's clever. I like that.
It leverages that automatic behavior that you already have, and then it makes it way easier to integrate a new habit without relying so much on, willpower.
I see. So it's like you're tricking yourself into doing it.
A little bit.
Hmm.
I mean, he gave another example too, like if you usually just scroll on your phone first thing in the morning, try replacing that with writing down like your top 3 priorities for the day.
Okay, yeah, that's a good one. So, habit stacking, that's a great way to build those positive routines. But I've also heard that your environment can play a huge role in your success. Like, if you're trying to make a change, you need to set up your environment to support that change.
Right, he talks about that too. This speaker is a huge advocate for that idea. Like designing your environment to minimize distractions and make it as easy as possible to make those positive choices. For example, if you're trying to eat healthier, the first thing you got to do is get all the junk food out of your house. Or if you want to read more, make sure you have a book by your bed ready to go.
So it's like you're setting yourself up for success before the temptation can even, pop up.
Exactly, exactly. But even with the best intentions and like the perfect environment, we all mess up sometimes, right?
Yeah, of course.
What do you think is the most important thing to remember when that happens?
Well, from what we've been talking about, it sounds like the key is to not dwell on it and just try to get back on track as soon as possible. Would you say that's accurate?
Absolutely. He really emphasizes that,
Mm.
it's a journey. It's not about perfection. Everyone falls off track sometimes. It's really about how you respond to those setbacks.
So instead of beating yourself up, just acknowledge it,
Yeah.
learn from it, and move on.
Exactly. You got it. It's all about cultivating that resilience, that ability to bounce back from setbacks and just keep moving towards your goals. Now, one of the biggest things he talked about was excuses. Excuses we make to avoid being disciplined. What are some common ones you found yourself using?
Oh my gosh, I am the queen of excuses. I don't have time. I'm too tired. I'll just start tomorrow. I use them all the time. It's so easy to let those justifications completely derail your efforts.
He called them lies we tell ourselves, just to stay in our comfort zone. And he does a really good job of like breaking them down one by one, exposing them for what they really are, which is basically just barriers to reaching our potential.
I see.
So let's take that first one you mentioned, I don't have time. How do you think he addresses that one?
Well, he reminds us that we all have the same 24 hours in a day, right? It's
I,
not really about having more time. It's about choosing how to spend the time you do have.
right. And prioritizing what truly matters, letting go of those less important activities that just drain our time and energy.
That's definitely easier said than done, though. I mean, it's so easy to get caught up in the craziness of life and then totally lose sight of your goals.
It is. It is.
Yeah.
And what about that classic, I'm too tired? I think that one's the worst.
Yeah, I use that one a lot, too.
He suggests that often, I'm too tired is actually masking something else. It's like mental resistance. Our brains are wired to seek comfort and avoid effort, right?
So even when we're not physically tired, we might still say we are, just as an excuse to avoid doing something that feels, I don't know, challenging or uncomfortable.
Yeah, I think that's what he's saying. He's like, recognize that sometimes I'm too tired is a mental barrier, not a physical one. And a lot of times, even if you don't feel like it, if you can just take that first step, you can push past that resistance.
It's like that saying, the hardest part is starting.
Exactly. Once you start, you often find that you have the energy to keep going. But I think what's important here is being mindful of those things that trigger our excuses.
What kind of things?
You talked about like phone notifications that distract you constantly,
Mm.
or unhealthy food that you keep in the house,
Yeah.
or even toxic relationships that drain your energy and pull you away from your goals.
Yeah, those are all big ones for me.
It's about recognizing those things in your life that make it easy to make excuses and then actively taking steps to create a more supportive environment.
So it's not just willpower. It's about setting yourself up for success.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And he also pointed out that, being inconsistent is a huge weakness. Like we start off with these great intentions and then life happens. We get busy. We lose momentum.
It's like we treat our goals as optional, something we can do when we feel like it instead of making them a priority.
Yeah, exactly. He wants us to treat our goals like a crucial appointment or like a flight we have to catch. You wouldn't just skip those because you're tired or don't feel like it.
Okay, that's a great way to think about it.
Treat them with that same level of importance.
Yeah.
But it's not just about all those external things. There's also an internal element to discipline.
Right. What is that?
He really stressed taking ownership. We are responsible for our actions, our progress, and ultimately our results. It all comes down to us.
Yeah, that can feel kind of overwhelming, but also empowering too. Knowing that you have the power to make a change.
Right. But how do we make that jump from knowing we should be disciplined to actually wanting to put in the work, to being motivated?
Right. How do you make yourself do something you don't feel like doing?
Well, he introduces this concept called the pain and pleasure principle. It's the idea that our decisions are basically driven by a desire to avoid pain and seek pleasure.
Yeah, that makes sense. We all want to feel good, right?
But here's the thing. He says we often use this principle in the wrong way. Like we think of the pain as being the effort and the sacrifice involved in achieving those goals. And then the pleasure is like comfort and instant gratification.
So we end up avoiding the very things that will actually make us happy in the long run.
Yeah. He's like, you're choosing the sugar rush over the long-term health benefits. He wants us to kind of rewire that association, to start linking pain with inaction, like the regret of staying stuck,
Yeah.
and to link pleasure with progress, with that sense of accomplishment that comes with moving towards your goals.
So basically, you need to shift your perspective. Look at discipline as a way to get what you want instead of something you're forced to do.
Yeah, and he suggests using visualization to help with this. Like imagine two versions of yourself. One is disciplined, thriving, achieving goals. The other is undisciplined, stuck, filled with regret. Which one do you want to be?
Yeah, that's powerful. And I think that really emphasizes how important it is to connect with your goals on an emotional level, right? To really feel them.
Absolutely. But he also acknowledges that focusing only on those long-term rewards can be demotivating sometimes.
Mhm.
We need those little rewards along the way too, those immediate rewards.
So celebrating the small wins, is that what you mean?
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It reinforces those positive behaviors and makes you more likely to stick with it. It's like giving yourself a little pat on the back for every step you take towards those goals.
Yeah, I like that. So we've talked about habit stacking, designing your environment, getting rid of excuses, even rewiring your brain. But there's one key ingredient missing here. what about persistence? How do we stay committed, especially when things get tough?
That's a great question. And that is exactly what we're going to talk about in the next part of this deep dive. We're going to explore the role of persistence in mastering discipline and talk about some actionable strategies you can use to make it a part of your life.
All right, so we've talked about a lot. We've talked about how to understand discipline, how to build those habits, and even how to deal with those pesky excuses. But I'm really curious to dig into this idea of persistence. How do we actually stay committed to those goals, especially when things get tough?
Yeah, persistence, it's really the most crucial element of all of this, I think. It's what separates those who start from those who actually finish.
It's running the marathon and crossing the finish line.
Exactly, yeah. It's about that commitment to showing up even when every part of you just wants to give up.
That's where I always struggle. Like I start out all gung ho, and then life gets in the way, or I get discouraged, and then poof, all that momentum's gone. How do we cultivate that kind of, I don't know, unshakable persistence?
Well, the speaker was saying that you need to think of it less as like willpower
Hmm.
and more about like building systems and habits that kind of automate the process.
Mm.
Think about those things you do every day without even thinking about it. You brush your teeth, you
Mm.
get dressed, they just happen.
The routine.
Exactly, yeah. Because
Yeah.
they're so ingrained in your routine. And that's what we want to do with discipline.
So you mean like making those choices, those positive choices, so automatic that they basically become your default mode of operating?
Exactly, yeah. He's like, you have to make those desired actions the easy option,
Mhm.
the most appealing option. Like if you want to work out every morning, you got to make it as easy as possible to do that.
How do you do that?
Lay your clothes out the night before,
Mhm.
have your water bottle ready, have your workout playlist all queued up, eliminate any decision points that might give you a chance to talk yourself out of it.
Oh, that's a good idea. Get rid of all those little obstacles. Yeah. But what about those days when, like, no matter how prepared you are, those negative thoughts just creep in? I'm not
Mhm.
good enough. I'll never achieve this. Why am I even bothering? All that. How do you deal with that?
Yeah, the inner critic.
Yeah.
We all have that inner critic. And he says the best way to handle that is to really actively combat those messages with positive affirmations.
So instead of saying, I can't, you're saying you should say, I am capable, I am strong, I am persistent.
Exactly. It might feel kind of silly at first, but saying those positive statements over and over, it can really help rewire your brain to focus on what you can do, not what you can't.
So it's like you're training your brain to be your own cheerleader instead of like your own worst enemy.
Yeah, I love that.
And speaking of cheerleaders, he also talked about how important it is to have like external accountability to help with persistence.
Oh, yeah, yeah. We're way more likely to follow through if we know someone's watching, you
Yeah.
know, even if it's just an accountability partner or a
So it's
friend.
like having that personal trainer.
Right, to keep you accountable. Celebrate those wins and remind you why you're doing it in the first place.
Yeah. And also don't underestimate the power of like actually tracking your progress, whether you're using a habit tracker, a journal, or just like a spreadsheet. Seeing those little wins add up can be so motivating.
Absolutely. It's a visual reminder of how far you've come,
Mm.
which I think is super helpful for those days when you're like, ooh, am I even making any progress?
Yeah, for sure. So this speaker, he also reminds us that persistence isn't about just like sprinting towards the finish line, right? It's about enjoying the journey and finding that satisfaction in the process.
Mm. It's all those little efforts, those consistent efforts.
Yeah, it makes me think about like planting a seed and waiting for it to grow.
Yeah.
You're not going to see those results overnight.
Yeah. It takes time and it takes consistent nurturing and patience.
A lot of patience.
But eventually you'll see that beautiful flower
Mm.
or that big, strong tree.
Okay, so what about setbacks? Because those are inevitable. We all have those days when we miss a workout or we eat that extra cookie or whatever it is, and we just want to give up. How do we handle those moments so they don't derail our entire journey?
Well, he says that you need to realize that setbacks, they're normal. They're going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about being perfect. It's about getting back on track as quickly as possible. So you messed up. Okay, acknowledge it, learn from it, and keep going.
Okay, so it's about cultivating that resilience.
It is. It's what separates those who achieve from those who don't.
Yeah.
It's about not giving up on yourself and your dreams.
So instead of waiting for that motivation to just like magically strike, we should try to make discipline our default setting, our guiding principle. It's about taking those little actions day after day that will ultimately lead to those big changes.
And remember, discipline, it's not about punishing yourself or restricting yourself. It's about freedom. It's about the freedom to create the life that you want, to become the best version of yourself.
Oh, I love that. It's not about deprivation, it's about empowerment. Well, this has been a really inspiring conversation. I don't know about you, but I am ready to go out there and tackle those goals with way more discipline and
Me
persistence.
too. And remember, guys, it's a journey, not a destination. Embrace it. Celebrate those wins, no matter how small, and don't ever give up on yourself.
Thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it helpful and motivating. Until next time, keep striving, keep growing, and keep diving